All right, so we're going to be looking at this chapter from Behavior Analysis for Lasting Change.
Okay.
And it's all about setting the right goals in ABA, which is, we both know, that's the foundation for any successful behavior change plan.
For sure, for sure.
But I'm really intrigued by how this chapter connects goal setting to something called an organization's mission.
Yeah, it's fascinating how the book really emphasizes the bigger picture, right? Like, it's not just about picking a behavior and trying to change it.
Right.
It's about understanding the context, the individual, the environment, the organization's mission. Like, it all plays a role.
Yeah, it really does. It's like setting a destination before you start a road trip.
Yeah.
Right. You need to know where you're going before you can figure out how to get there.
Exactly.
So let's break this down. What exactly is a mission in this context?
So think of a mission statement, like a compass for an organization.
Okay.
It defines its purpose, its reason for being.
Uh-huh.
For example, a school's mission might be to prepare students for success in life.
Right.
While a company's mission might be to provide innovative solutions for their customers.
Okay, so it's like the driving force behind everything they do.
Exactly.
And this chapter is saying that our ABA goals should align with that mission.
Exactly. It's about making sure everyone is rowing in the same direction.
I love that analogy.
If a school's mission is to promote academic excellence, then the goals we set for individual students should support that broader aim.
Oh, that makes so much sense. It's all starting to click.
Yeah.
But before we jump into setting those goals, the chapter talks about assessments.
Yes.
Can you walk us through those?
Absolutely. So the book highlights two main types of assessments.
Okay.
Strategic and behavioral.
Okay.
So strategic planning is about figuring out where the organization wants to go in the long term,
right.
Like creating a roadmap for the future.
Okay, so strategic planning is for the organization as a whole.
Yeah.
What about behavioral assessments? Those are for the individual, right?
Right. Behavioral assessments help us to really understand the individual's behavior in depth.
Okay.
There are 3 levels: indirect, descriptive, and functional.
Got it.
So indirect assessments involve gathering information from people who know the individual well.
Right.
Parents, teachers, caregivers.
Okay.
Think interviews or questionnaires.
Okay, so we're getting different perspectives on the individual's behavior.
Exactly.
What about descriptive assessments?
Descriptive assessments are all about observation.
Okay.
So we directly observe and record the behavior in its natural setting,
Right.
paying attention to things like how often it occurs, how long it lasts, and what happens right before and after.
Like a detective gathering clues.
Exactly.
And lastly, we have functional assessments.
Yes.
What's the purpose of those?
So functional assessments are like solving a puzzle.
Yeah.
We're trying to figure out the why behind the behavior. What purpose does it serve for the individual? What are they getting out of it?
Uh-huh.
This helps us to develop interventions that address the root of the problem.
So we're not just trying to stop the behavior. We're trying to understand it and teach a more appropriate way to get those needs met.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've gathered information about the organization's mission and the individual's behavior through assessments.
Right.
Now let's talk about the goals themselves.
Okay.
How does the chapter define a goal?
The chapter defines goals as broad statements about desired outcomes.
Okay.
It's like painting a picture of what we want to see happen.
Right. But how do we decide which goals to choose? It seems like there are a lot of factors to consider.
Absolutely. The book outlines several key factors that influence goal selection.
Okay.
First and foremost, we need to make sure our goals are ethical and in the best interests of the individual.
Of course.
We always want to prioritize their well-being.
Of course. It's not just about changing behavior for the sake of change. It has to be beneficial for the individual.
Right.
What else do we need to consider?
Well, goals should be achievable, yet challenging.
Okay.
We want to set the bar high enough to encourage growth.
Right.
But not so high that the individual feels overwhelmed or discouraged.
It's finding that sweet spot, right?
Yes.
Something that stretches them, but is still attainable.
Exactly.
What about the benefits of reaching the goal? Do those matter too?
Definitely. Goals can have both direct and indirect benefits.
Mm-hmm.
For example, if we're working with a child who struggles with social skills,
Right.
a goal of improving those skills would directly benefit the child.
Uh-huh.
But it might also indirectly benefit their teachers and parents who might experience less stress and frustration.
So we're thinking about the ripple effects of these goals.
Yes.
Who they impact and how.
Exactly.
What about the individual's age and developmental level? How do those factor into goal selection?
So goals need to be developmentally appropriate.
Okay.
What's suitable for a teenager might not be right for a toddler.
Right.
We need to consider where the individual is on their developmental journey and tailor the goals accordingly.
So it's like meeting them where they are and building from there.
Ex-
And just like we talked about with missions,
Yes.
the chapter emphasizes that goals should align with the overall mission of the organization where the intervention is taking place.
Exactly. It's about ensuring that everyone is working towards a common purpose.
Right.
If we're working with a student in a school setting, our goals should support the school's mission,
Right.
whether that's academic achievement, social emotional learning, or career readiness.
It's all connected. Now, I'm really curious about this concept of functional goals that the
Right.
chapter highlights.
Okay.
What makes a goal functional?
So functional goals focus on increasing desirable behaviors
Okay.
that serve a purpose for the individual.
Okay.
Instead of just trying to decrease a problem behavior,
Right.
we focus on teaching a replacement behavior
Right.
that meets the same need,
Right.
but in a more appropriate way.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure, imagine a child who throws tantrums to get attention.
Okay.
Instead of just focusing on reducing the tantrums.
Yep.
A functional goal would be teaching the child to raise their hand or politely ask for attention.
Got it.
We're addressing the underlying need for attention, but in a way that's more socially acceptable.
That's a great example. It's
Yeah.
not just about stopping the behavior. It's about teaching a new, more functional way to achieve the same outcome.
Exactly.
Now, the chapter also introduces these terms, behavioral cusps and pivotal behaviors.
Right.
Those sound pretty complex.
They are important concepts in ABA.
Okay.
So behavioral cusps are behaviors that open up a whole new world of possibilities for learning and development.
Okay.
Think of a baby learning to crawl.
Okay.
Suddenly they have access to a whole new environment,
Right.
and that opens up so many opportunities for further learning.
Oh, I see. It's like unlocking a door to a new room full of possibilities.
Exactly.
And pivotal behaviors. How do those fit in?
Pivotal behaviors are like superpowers.
Okay.
Once learned, they have a ripple effect leading to positive changes in other areas. For example, teaching a child with autism to initiate conversations might lead to improvements in their play skills, social interactions, and overall communication.
Wow. So focusing on these types of behaviors
Right.
can have a huge impact. It's like getting more bang for your buck, so to speak.
Exactly.
Now, the chapter mentions that there are different approaches to goal setting, right?
Exactly. There's the direct approach,
Okay.
where we directly teach the desired behavior,
Okay.
and the indirect approach, where we focus on modifying the environment or teaching alternative behaviors that might indirectly reduce the problem behavior.
So the best approach depends on the specific situation and the individual's needs. It's about finding the right tool for the job.
Exactly.
Before we move on, is there anything else in this chapter that really stood out to you about goal setting in ABA?
I think the book really underscores that there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
Individualized goal setting is crucial.
Okay.
We need to consider all these factors we've discussed, the mission, the assessments, the individual's needs, their environment, to create goals that are meaningful, achievable, and ultimately lead to positive change.
It's about taking all this information and using it to craft a roadmap for success.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Like we're creating this personalized map,
Yeah,
tailored to the individual's needs and goals.
exactly.
Now, you mentioned earlier how organizational culture can influence behavior.
Yeah.
And the chapter uses a great analogy to illustrate this point.
Okay.
It compares a workplace where everyone is told to, be more productive without clear guidance to being lost without a compass.
Yeah, it's a perfect analogy.
Right.
Like people need direction support and a shared understanding of what productive actually looks like in their specific context.
Right.
That's where organizational culture comes in.
Right. So it's not just about telling people what to do.
Yeah.
It's about creating an environment that nurtures those desired behaviors. The chapter uses the example of a school trying to improve student behavior
Okay.
through something called school-wide positive behavior support, or SWPBS. Can you tell us more about that?
So SWPBS is a framework that focuses on building a positive and supportive school environment to prevent problem behaviors before they even arise.
Okay.
It's about shifting from a reactive approach, like punishing bad behavior,
Right.
to a proactive one, teaching and reinforcing positive behaviors.
That sounds like a much more effective long-term strategy.
Yeah,
But changing an entire school's culture is a huge undertaking.
it is.
Where do you even begin?
So the chapter lays out a clear roadmap for successful SWPBS implementation.
Okay.
First, you need a strong leadership team that's fully committed to the program and can guide the process.
Buy-in from the top is essential.
Absolutely. Then they need to develop a comprehensive school-wide plan that clearly outlines the desired behaviors they want to promote and the strategies for achieving those goals.
So it's like we're creating a blueprint for positive behavior.
Exactly.
But I imagine that even with a well-defined plan, implementing something like SWPBS across an entire school can be pretty challenging. What are some of the hurdles you might encounter along the way?
So resistance to change is a natural human response.
Sure.
And you're bound to encounter some pushback.
Right.
Teachers, staff, even students might be accustomed to doing things a certain way and hesitant to embrace new approaches.
It's understandable. Change can be uncomfortable even when it's for the better.
Exactly. That's why clear communication, ongoing training, and opportunities for feedback are crucial for successful implementation.
Got it.
Another common challenge is maintaining consistency.
Okay.
Implementing SWPBS effectively requires a sustained collaborative effort from everyone involved.
Right.
It can't be a one-time initiative.
Right.
It needs to be woven into the fabric of the school culture.
So it's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly.
But I imagine the rewards are well worth it when the entire school environment shifts toward positive behaviors.
Absolutely. The chapter highlights how creating a positive and supportive climate benefits everyone.
Yeah.
Students, teachers, staff, and families. It can lead to increased academic achievement.
Wow.
Improved social-emotional skills, and a more enjoyable and productive learning environment for all.
It's a win-win for everyone.
It is.
Now, shifting gears a bit, the chapter also touches on this idea of strategic planning.
Okay.
And it seems like there are some parallels between how organizations set goals and how we set goals for individuals in ABA.
You're spot on.
Right.
Strategic planning for an organization is very similar to setting goals for an individual.
Okay.
It involves identifying the desired outcomes, assessing the current situation, developing a plan to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and then evaluating progress along the way.
Okay, so it's like creating a roadmap for the organization's future.
Exactly.
But how do they actually go about creating this strategic plan? Where do they even begin?
Well, as we discussed earlier, the first step is to clearly define the organization's mission.
Right. The mission is the North Star pointing the way forward.
Exactly.
What comes next?
Next comes a thorough evaluation of the organization's current reality.
Okay.
This involves analyzing its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Okay.
It's like taking a snapshot of where the organization stands, what it's doing well, and where there's room for improvement.
So they're taking stock of their current resources and identifying areas for growth.
Precisely. From there, they can start setting those SMART goals, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Right.
These goals should flow directly from the mission and address the key areas identified in the SWOT analysis.
It's all starting to connect.
Yeah.
The mission guides the goals, the SWOT analysis informs the plan.
Yes.
And the SMART goals provide the concrete steps for moving forward.
Exactly.
But how do they know if they're on track?
That's where regular monitoring and evaluation come in.
Okay.
The organization needs to systematically track its progress toward its goals, celebrate successes, and make adjustments along the way as needed.
It's an iterative process, constantly assessing, adapting, and refining the plan based on real-world data and feedback.
Exactly.
And that flexibility is key to achieving long-term success.
You got it. It's about being responsive to changing circumstances and making sure the plan is always aligned with the organization's evolving needs and priorities.
I love it. It makes so much sense. Now, let's bring it back to the individual level. We've talked about assessments in a general sense, but the chapter really dives deep into those different types of behavioral assessments. What stood out to you about those?
You know, I think the key takeaway is that there's no magic bullet assessment.
Right.
The right tool really depends on the individual and the behavior we're looking at.
Right.
It's like choosing the right ingredients for a recipe. You wouldn't use salt when you need sugar.
So let's unpack these ingredients. You mentioned indirect assessments earlier. Can you give us some examples of how those might be used in practice?
Sure. So indirect assessments are all about gathering information from the people who know the individual best. So we might interview parents, teachers, or caregivers to get their perspectives on the behavior.
Right.
We might also use questionnaires like the Vineland Adaptive Behavior Scales, which gives us a broad overview of the individual's adaptive functioning.
So we're gathering insights from multiple sources to create a more complete picture.
Exactly.
What about descriptive assessments? How do those differ from indirect assessments?
So descriptive assessments involve directly observing the behavior in its natural environment.
Okay.
We're like detectives carefully documenting everything we see.
Right.
We record the frequency of the behavior, how long it lasts, the intensity, and what happens right before and after.
It's like taking detailed field notes on the behavior.
Exactly.
What kind of information can we glean from that kind of observation?
By carefully analyzing those descriptive assessments, we can start to identify patterns and potential triggers for the behavior.
Okay.
This gives us valuable clues about the function of the behavior, what purpose it serves for the individual.
And that leads us to functional assessments, right? Those are all about cracking the code of why the behavior is happening.
Exactly. Functional assessments are like solving a mystery. We want to understand the why behind the behavior. What need is it meeting for the individual? Is it to get attention, to escape a demand, to gain access to something desirable?
Right.
Once we understand the function, we can develop interventions that are much more effective.
It's like finding the root of the problem instead of just treating the symptoms.
Exactly.
Now, once we've gathered all this information from our assessments, we're ready to start formulating goals right. But what makes a good goal in ABA?
That's where those SMART goals come in handy again.
Right.
Specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound.
Okay.
These criteria help ensure that our goals are clear, actionable, and likely to lead to meaningful change.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. What does it mean for a goal to be specific?
So a specific goal clearly defines the target behavior in a way that leaves no room for ambiguity.
Right.
Instead of saying something vague like improve communication, a specific goal might be increase the number of times the individual initiates conversations with peers.
So we're being very precise about what we want to see change.
Exactly.
What about measurable? Why is that important?
Measurable goals allow us to track progress and determine whether our interventions are working.
Okay.
We need to be able to quantify the behavior in some way. So instead of saying reduce tantrums, a measurable goal might be decrease the duration of tantrums by 50%.
So we're not just guessing, we have concrete data to show whether the behavior is changing.
Right.
What about achievable? Why is that an important criterion for goals?
So goals should be challenging, but they also need to be attainable.
Right.
Setting unrealistic goals can set the individual up for failure, which can be incredibly discouraging. It's about finding that sweet spot where effort meets possibility.
So we want to push them to grow, but not set them up for disappointment.
Exactly.
What about relevance? Why does that matter in goal setting?
Well, goals should be relevant to the individual's needs and priorities. They should address behaviors that are meaningful and will make a real difference in their life. We're not just changing behavior for the sake of change. We're aiming to improve their quality of life.
So we're focusing on what truly matters.
Exactly.
And finally, time-bound. Why is it important to set a time frame for goals?
Setting a time frame helps us to stay focused and accountable.
Okay.
It allows us to evaluate the effectiveness of our interventions within a specific period and make adjustments as needed.
So we're being intentional and strategic with our goals.
Exactly.
But even with the most carefully crafted goals, we know that challenges can arise.
Yes.
What are some of the things that can get in the way of achieving our goals in ABA?
One common challenge is inconsistency in implementing the interventions.
Right.
If we're not consistently delivering the intervention as planned, we can't expect consistent results. It's like trying to grow a plant without watering it regularly.
Consistency is key. What other roadblocks might we encounter?
Another common challenge is generalization. Sometimes an individual might learn a new skill in one setting, but struggle to apply it in other situations or with different people.
So the learning isn't transferring to real-world contexts.
Exactly.
How can we address that?
We need to build generalization into our interventions from the start.
Okay.
We can do this by teaching the skill in a variety of settings with different people using different materials.
Right.
The more we can vary the context, the better the chances of that skill transferring to new situations.
It's about making the learning as robust and flexible as possible.
Exactly.
What other challenges should we be prepared for?
Well, life is unpredictable. Unexpected changes in the individual's environment or circumstances can definitely impact our progress towards goals.
Of course.
And sometimes the individual themselves might present challenges.
Right.
Motivation can be a big factor.
Yeah.
If they're not invested in the process or don't see the value in the goals, it's going to be much harder to make progress.
It's about understanding their perspective, collaborating with them, and making sure the goals are truly meaningful to them.
Exactly.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, is there one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with about the art and science of setting goals in ABA?
I think the most important thing to remember is that goal setting isn't a one-time task.
Okay.
It's a dynamic, ongoing process that requires us to be adaptable, responsive, and always focused on the individual's best interests.
It's about blending the science of behavior change with the art of human connection. We're using our knowledge and skills to empower individuals to live more fulfilling lives.
Well said. And as ABA professionals, we have the incredible privilege of being a part of that journey.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into the world of goal setting in ABA. It's clearly much more than just a checklist. It's about thoughtful planning, individualized support, and a commitment to creating meaningful and lasting change. Thanks for joining me today for this deep dive into behavior analysis for lasting change.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.